Bienvenue à la réunion.
Welcome to meeting number 16 of the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans.
Standing Order 1082, the committee is meeting to continue its study on the review of the Fisheries Act. Et la réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule.
Today's meeting is taking place under hybrid format pursuant to the Standing Order. Members may participate in person or on Zoom.
Before we continue, I would like to ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. And pursuant to our routine motions, I would like to advise committee members that all witnesses appearing virtually today have conducted the required technical testing. I'd also like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And for those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. En ce qui concerne
Regarding interpretation, for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen between the floor, English, and French. For those who are in the room, you can use an earpiece and choose the language channel of your choice.
all comments should be addressed through the chair. Pour les députés présents.
For members in the room, that would be everyone. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand. The clerk and myself will do our best to maintain the speaking order, and we thank you for your patience.
So with that, I'd like to welcome our witnesses today. Premièrement, nous avons Monsieur Jean-Sébastien.
First, we have Jean-Sébastien Vacher, commercial fisher and former fisheries officer, by video conference.
We have Nigel Boots, fisherman, et en personne de l'association.
In person, from the Association des Crabiers Acadiens, we have Régent Noël, President, and Marcel Hébert, Director General.
Nous allons commencer.
We will begin with opening statements from the witnesses for 5 minutes or less. We will begin with Mr. Vacher.
Bonjour.
Good afternoon. I'm Jean-Sébastien Vacher, a former fisheries officer from 2001 to 2008, and since then, I've been a commercial fisherman. The topic I was asked to speak on today is obstacles to law enforcement by fisheries officers, and I have some opening remarks before getting to the heart of the matter. I'd like to note the purpose of the Fisheries Act, which is to provide a framework for the proper management and monitoring of fisheries, and to protect and conserve fish and fish habitat. So I see two main obstacles to law enforcement by fisheries officers. The first is the proliferation of rules. There are so many rules stemming from the Fisheries Act and associated regulations, and there's one for conditions for permits for fishermen, and those conditions are written by public servants who aren't legislators. And just to give you an example, as a crab fisherman in Zone 16, I have about 200 over 16 pages to be a commercial fisherman. So more and more rules. It's a serious problem for law enforcement because fisheries officers can't enforce all of those rules and have to begin by making choices that aren't always the proper choice. They might just enforce the easiest rules to enforce, and to the detriment of rules that are harder to enforce but would be more sound for fisheries management. For example, poaching networks. Often fisheries officers will ensure that commercial fishers are respecting the rules for the conditions of their permits. The internet connection is unstable, and they will let poachers through. And now the second obstacle, which would be discrimination in law enforcement, between non-Indigenous and Indigenous fishermen. And I don't want to speak against Indigenous nations. It's very good that the government has recognized their ancestral rights and that DFO facilitates their integration into commercial fishing. This is a big improvement for their communities and the communities around them. However, in law enforcement, I saw this as a fisheries officer. What we were told is to let things go because Indigenous people were new to fishing and it could create legal issues, and the authorities didn't want to deal with that. So we would never issue offenses to Indigenous fishers. However, we were supposed to give them to non-Indigenous fishers, especially commercial fishers. The problem is that most poaching networks are based on Indigenous fishers who aren't necessarily authorized by their band council. Sometimes they're not even associated with one, but they are Indigenous, and often they're involved in the poaching networks for the illegal sale of seafood. And that creates injustice. It harms the proper management of fisheries because we don't have all of the data on catch, but in addition, it creates a feeling of unfairness regarding the other fishers, the non-Indigenous fishers who aren't treated in the same way, but also have the right to fish, and they have traditions and a culture. So those are the main obstacles, if I summarize, that I could find in enforcing the law by fisheries officers. So too many rules, especially license conditions. It could be reviewed for those to really be sound rules because they aren't always. And then second, I would say discrimination in law enforcement, Indigenous fishers versus non-Indigenous fishers.
Là-dessus,
And so I'll close. Thank you very much, Mr. Vacher. Now,
to Mr. Biot for 5 minutes or less, but maybe, oh, there you go. Thank you. We can see you. And so you'll have the floor for 5 minutes or less.
Hi. I would like to thank the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans for the opportunity to present today. I'm a commercial fisher, and I make my living off the sea in LFA 25 in Prince Edward Island. For more than a decade, commercial fishermen in LFA 25 have worked tirelessly to rebuild, protect, and stabilize the lobster fishery. Our industry has taken responsibility financially and operationally to ensure the long-term health of the resource. The success of the fishery today is not accidental. It is a direct result of disciplined conservation measures, industry-funded buybacks, and strict compliance with regulations. However, these hard-won gains are now being undermined by ongoing and increasingly widespread abuse by some fishers within the FSC and unauthorized fishing for a moderate livelihood. This situation threatens conservation objectives, weakens proper management, and erodes trust in the regulatory system. Commercial fishermen in LFA 25 invested heavily in buybacks over the past 15 years, reducing the number of active licenses and traps in the water. These buybacks were not refunded by government. They were paid for by the fishers themselves because we understand the long-term value of protecting the stock. Fewer traps, fewer licenses created real measurable conservation gains. Our fleet has embraced strict science-based conservation practices, which include trap reductions, escape mechanisms, returning all 115 millimeter or larger lobsters to the water, mandatory seasonal closures, detailed logbook, catch reporting, and compliance requirements. We fish only in regulated seasons. We are monitored through e-logs. We are inspected at sea. We operate enforceable reporting requirements. These measures have improved stock health and contribute to long-term sustainability, even during years of environmental stress. The commercial sector has done everything asked of us to protect the fishery. Lobsters caught in the FSC fishery, which is intended for food, social, and ceremonial purposes, has increasingly been used for unregulated commercial sale. This has been documented and reported by harvesters and community members for so many years. Some catch levels far exceed traditional or food-related requirements, and substantial volumes of lobsters taken under FSC are entering the commercial market illegally. Commercial fishermen have been raising these concerns through advisory committees, letters, emails, calls, and meetings with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and members of Parliament, and we feel that repeated requests and for action have been ignored. We are asking for monitoring, transparency, conservation-based limits, and equal enforcement. We seek the same rules for everyone. The single most important principle in fisheries management is fairness. Conservation cannot succeed when different groups operate under different sets of rules. The lobster stock does not distinguish between sectors, and neither should the enforcement of conservation measures. FSC fishing either occurs during the commercial fishing season, or FSC fishing must have 100% third-party independent dockside monitoring. This ensures that legitimately harvested FSC lobsters is respected, while preventing illegal commercial sale and protecting lobster stock health. Communal commercial licenses issued to Indigenous communities are intended to benefit the community directly. Leasing these licenses to third party undermines transparency, fair access, and conservation-based management. DFO must enforce the prohibition and licenses leasings consistently across all sectors. In closing, the commercial fishing industry is not asking for special treatment. We are asking for equal treatment and equal enforcement. Commercial fishermen have spent over a decade sacrificing income, reducing effort, and funding conservation measures that build the fishery into what it is today. We are proud of that work, but we are deeply concerned that current mismanagement and unequal enforcement threaten everything we have built. If the Government of Canada and DFO want a sustainable, stable, and fair fishery for all harvesters, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, then we must return to the core principle that has always protected the resource. One fishery, one resource, one set of rules, and equal treatment and equal responsibility for everyone. The future of the fishery depends on balanced conservation, first fisheries management. This is something we should all agree on. Thank you.
Very much. Nous allons maintenant.
Now we will go to Mr. Hébert for 5 minutes or less. Hello. Thank you for the invitation to appear before this committee on a sensitive subject that is of great concern to our snow crab fishers in the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence. As you know, the snow crab fishery is considered one of the best managed fisheries in the world. Let me highlight a few of the current management measures. Weighing of all landings at the wharf, 20% at-sea observer coverage, closure of specific quadrants when there is a high presence of soft-shelled crab, in order to protect recruitment and reproduction, and area closures when North Atlantic right whales are observed. Only commercial-sized adult snow crabs with a carapace size of 95 millimeters or more are harvested. An annual survey allows us to estimate commercial biomass and monitor population trends. Quota for the snow crab fishery in the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence is based on a decision-making framework incorporating the reference points from the precautionary approach, ensuring stocks remain in the healthy zone at all times. As you know, illegal landings of snow crab are not included in the official landing data of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. Illegal landings therefore lead to overexploitation of the stock, which undermines its reproductive capacity, particularly during the declining phase of the population when the residual biomass is decreasing. It should be noted that the snow crab fishery in the southern Gulf is a recruitment fishery, meaning that it depends on annual recruitment to the fishery at levels of 75% or more. The snow crab fishery is therefore very dependent on annual recruitment, and additional pressures could have a negative impact on the profitability of our fleets and the local economy of our coastal regions. It is important to remember the collapse of landings in 1989, when yields were only 6,950 tons in Zone 12. Following Radio-Canada's Enquête broadcast, we are deeply concerned about the extent of illegal lobster landings and the increasingly sophisticated means employed to carry them out. In fact, the same players have access to the snow crab fishery following the decision to share the snow crab resource in 2003. Illegal landings are underestimated in the snow crab fishery in the southern Gulf. Normally, in a healthy population, the natural mortality rate for commercial-sized adult crab is between 20 and 25%. In the southern Gulf, the natural mortality rate is 35 to 45%. One of the reasons mentioned in the annual review by the DFO science sector is illegal landings. The persistence of illegal landings increases the exploitation rate and reduces the residual biomass year after year, which in turn affects the reproductive capacity of the stock by skewing the sex ratio of large spawners. This will lead to long-term genetic changes and significantly reduce future recruitment. What is most concerning to us is that there is an incentive for these inshore fishers to land illegal catches of snow crab. Quota is allocated to non-profit associations, which then distribute it annually through a lottery to some of its members. So the inshore fisher selected to fish part of the association's allocation receives a very small portion of the market price, with most of it going to the association. As a result, DFO is funding non-profit inshore organizations to the tune of millions of dollars annually, while other midshore associations receive no revenue at all. For example, in 2025, the price paid to fishers ranged from $7 to $8 per pound for snow crab. The inshore fisher made $1.50 a pound, and the association received $5.50 to $6.50 for each pound. This creates a strong incentive to sell it under the table in order to receive the full market price. At any rate, the lobster fishery has become highly lucrative, and there is no longer a need for this allocation, which was meant to support a fleet reorganization in 2003, an objective that was achieved only minimally, if at all. We are working very closely with DFO, and discussions are currently underway on how to limit illegal landings of snow crab. We request that the number of wharves designated as landing sites be limited to improve the dockside monitoring, given the limited number of fisheries officers. We also call for an increase in the number of fishery officers, the installation of cameras on all designated wharves with full-time access for fishery officers, the use of drones, the installation of cameras on inshore vessels, or 100% at-sea observer coverage for inshore fishers. In the Acadian Peninsula, as in other regions of the maritime provinces in Quebec, lobster and snow crab are the only major commercial species remaining that generate millions of dollars for the economy of our coastal regions. Harsher fines are necessary for fishers who break the rules in order to significantly reduce this illegal activity, which impacts the resource for future generations. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hébert.
Our opening remarks, we're going to get into the first round of questioning, the 6-minute round, starting with Mr. Small.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I'm going to start off with some pictures here. Mr. Boot, I don't know if you're familiar with these pictures. Taken somewhere not far from your fishing area 25, I think maybe in early June, or sorry, late June, early July maybe? Or is that about when these pictures were taken, do you know?
Yes, I'm quite sure that's when they were taken.
So Mr. Boot, who could legally fish during that time? Was the Area 25 commercial lobster fishery open then?
No, it was not.
So have you heard of any pursuit by DFO to get to the bottom of these dumped lobsters? And by the looks of it, many of them were female, in fact.
Yes, by the pictures they were, but I haven't heard any feedback on DFO, what they've done.
Okay, so it's shocking to see that waste of lobsters. We had the head of public prosecution here on Thursday, and they denied that maintaining prosecution ratios based on ethnicity could possibly have the effect of watering down the number one objective of the Fisheries Act, which is conservation. Do you agree with that?
No, I do not. No.
To Monsieur Vacher, do you agree that the objective of maintaining prosecution ratios, what kind of effect do you think that could have on the number one objective of the Fisheries Act, which is conservation?
Il faudrait que vous répétiez la question.
I would need you to repeat the question. I haven't understood what you mean by that prosecution.
Pardon? I had my earpiece down. Could you repeat that, Mr. Vacher?
Oui,
Yes, I didn't understand the question properly. Could you repeat it, please?
We had the head of the Public Prosecution Service of Canada here witnessing on Thursday past, and they were asked if the intention to not to over ratio certain ethnicities, if that could have a negative effect with the Fisheries Act in terms of the Fisheries Act not being able to do what it's supposed to do in terms of conservation. What do you think of that?
je pense qu'effectivement,
I think it can create a serious problem because if people based on race are not prosecuted by DFO and there's no investigation into poaching allegations, well, listen, it's clear that conservation is in jeopardy. And in addition, for sound management, there's data lacking to establish quotas, proper quotas for fishers. It's clear it has a negative impact on the management of the resource.
So, Monsieur Vacher, in your opening statement, you mentioned discrimination in law enforcement and poaching networks. Sounds to me like it could be possible that large volumes of fish could be caught and sold. What's the impact of that on the productivity of the fishery in Atlantic Canada?
eh bien, je ne pourrais pas répondre avec
I couldn't answer specifically. It would take more expertise than I have. But it's clear that if there's a non-negligible amount of the resource and information on fisheries that are not accessible to DFO, it would be very difficult for scientists and managers to establish the amount of fishing, of catch, that's appropriate to respect the resource, the durability of the resource.
To Mr. Boot, do you have any theories on how those lobsters got into woods there in the pictures that I put up at the opening of the meeting?
I just from stories I heard that they come from the FSC fishery that they couldn't sell. They could not move the lobsters. Nobody wanted to buy them because they were FSC lobsters, and they dumped them in the woods.
So do you find it odd that DFO hasn't laid a charge yet regarding
Yes,
the
I find
dumping of
it.
those lobsters?
Yes, I find that very odd.
How widespread is this lobster dumping along the shores of Area 25?
I'm not quite sure. I know there was like a couple of 2 or 3 different places, but they were all pretty close to one area. I'm quite sure. I'm not real sure where they were, but they were all pretty close together, from what I was told.
So we were told by the Public Prosecution Service of Canada that they considered the ethnicity of infraction who were committing infractions. Are you disturbed by that?
Yes, I am.
So I'm afraid that that completes the time here. We're going to move next to Mr. Cormier for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Vacher, I will turn to you first, but later in the meeting. Well, you say you're a former fisheries officer, is that correct? Yes. In what region were you a fisheries officer? In the North Shore of Quebec, along the St. Lawrence. Okay. Earlier you said that you were told not to stop Indigenous fishers when there were offenses with illegal fishing. So, a very simple question. Who gave you the order to not arrest those people? Well, it's our supervisors who told us that it wasn't recommended because there had already been Supreme Court decisions and they didn't want to have more legal issues. So they're getting started in fishing, so don't look at that. When you're talking about supervisors, you mean regional supervisors, or in Quebec? For us, it's the Gulf region, but do you mean in Ottawa? No, it was our immediate managers, so regional. Okay, great. I'll come back to you, Mr. Vacher. I have other questions for other witnesses now. Mr. Hébert, Mr. Noel, thank you for joining us. A number of points that you touched on, just for my colleagues around the table, and I know most of them are familiar with fisheries. Snow crab fishery. All of the landings that you have in your fishing season, the total quota is 20 or 30 or 40,000 tons. Your landings, they're weighed, all of them, the majority, unless there are illegal landings. I'm talking normally, yes, everything is weighed. For lobster landings, as you know, probably, they're not all weighed or weighed at the wharf. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct. In your industry, when you get to the wharf, Mr. Noel, for example, gets to shore with his load. The boat is unloaded. And then what happens? Who's responsible to note that information? How many crabs were caught by Mr. Noel? How does it work? When Mr. Noel arrives at the wharf, he has to call and say that he's arrived 1 or 3 hours before he arrives. And when he gets there, there's a company for landings. And the fishers, there's one witness on the boat, but it's the company that takes the landings from the hull and weighs them one at a time until it's all weighed. So, Mr. Noel, if you want to sell crab or import it, or to sell it to other people, are you able to do so? No, we're not allowed to do that. All of the crab that comes out needs to be weighed with the company. And we're not allowed to take a portion before the unloading starts. And once it starts, when it's done, the boat has to be inspected as well to be sure there's no crab hidden in the boat. After all those crabs are weighed, if you decide to take some for yourself or for other people, are you allowed to do that? Is there a procedure to do so? After the boat has been unloaded, it's impossible to get crab. If we want to have some, it has to be weighed. We have to indicate it beforehand, and that's taken out of your allocation. It's taken out of my logbook, yes. It's added to my landing of the day. Would you be ready to say that it's much more difficult, and I know we're speaking very quickly, but is it more difficult in the crab industry to have illegal landings versus the lobster industry? It's different. When there aren't landings weighed at the wharf, you can go to 2 different wharfs and have 2 different weights. And That's what happens with lobster. For crab, it's very limited. If there are illegal landings, it has to really be done outside of the designated wharves or in another means. Regarding your industry, your traditional fishers, have some of them been caught with illegal landings? Has that happened? To my knowledge, no. Large quantities with 3 or 4 crabs in the past, yes. But not something on a large scale. It's really a minority. But with the penalties we have, it's just not possible. We only have 6 minutes, but I'll get back to you. And I'll ask the question. Do you think the fines are high enough? If somebody is caught with crab or lobster, do you think those fines are high enough to dissuade people from doing that? Not at all. The impact of illegal landing on the population is really negative in the long term. With illegal landing, it really has an impact on the reproductive capacity of the stock and on future recruitment. And each crab we take out of the population can't reproduce. With snow crab, it reproduces in December and February, March. So when there's an illegal activity, taking large spawners outside of the quota, well, it's an overexploitation of the stock, and in the long term, you'll have less recruitment, and it'll affect the genetic stock. Thank you very much, Mr. Cormier. Now, we will go to Mr. Deschênes. 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, everyone. Thank you to the witnesses for having joined us in person or virtually. Mr. Vacher, I have questions for you. I want to make the most of your observations. You're a crab and a lobster fisherman in Sept-Îles. You were a fisheries officer for 7 or 8 years. When you go to sea, do you see illegal fishing? Illegal lobster fishing? Certainly. I see it regularly. And it's just common. What do you do when you see that? Well, I've often reported it to DFO. I called fisheries officers to tell them, look, there's someone with the internet connection is cutting out.
Bien souvent, je connais le nom de la personne.
Often I know the person's name. I report it. The only time fisheries officers intervened was when somebody didn't have Indigenous status. Most people who do this have Indigenous status. They're not necessarily associated with a band council. They don't live in an Indigenous community. How do you know whether they're associated with a band council or not? What do you do to check? Well, I call the director of Indigenous fisheries in my region and I ask, is this person doing food fishing for you? And they say, no, we don't even know who that is. The person is not associated with our band council. The band council tells you that these are not authorized fishers. You contact fisheries officers, and what happens? Internet connection is unstable. There's no investigation. They just leave it as if we hadn't reported it. Do they explain why they don't intervene? There are often reasons. I asked it at the last meeting on lobster, and the fisheries officer said there were limited resources, so they couldn't work on everything. Well, listen. You say that there was action taken once. Yes. But it was not a person who had Indigenous status. Okay. And you were a fisheries officer, so when you were a fisheries officer, what were the directives you received regarding those doing illegal fishing? Well, it's very clear that those doing illegal fishing is who we needed to address, unless it was too complicated. Sometimes our managers said to check for compliance. We would go look at commercial fishers who had licenses, and we would ask them, we would check things off. Do they have their logbook? Internet connection is unstable. Do they have the conditions? Did they make their calls? We do that rather than working on poaching because it's more complicated and takes more resources. When you were a fisheries officer, what were the directives that you received regarding poachers or regarding their ethnic groups or their race? It's very clear that for Indigenous people, we weren't supposed to touch that. That was the directive. We don't want to have problems with them. We don't want new rulings that are binding court decisions, so don't address that. Even if it was an Indigenous person non-authorized by their band council, and if they were taking female lobsters out, your directive was to let that go. Exactly. Have there been times when you or other fisheries officers wanted to take action despite everything? To my knowledge, no. I haven't seen that. Not when I was a fisheries officer in any case. So your immediate superiors who said, don't intervene if there's an illegal fisher from a First Nation, even if they're not authorized. So this was a strict directive. Yes, exactly. And you were also a union representative. Yes, I was a union representative. And how did DFO act when one of your agents, your officers, wasn't comfortable with these directives? Well, listen. I couldn't tell you because it's not a case that happened. There's no one. I never had a case. I don't remember having a case when I was a union delegate where a fisheries officer wanted to take action even though the supervisor, no, usually we listen to the supervisor. Are you aware of cases where a confidentiality agreement was signed by a fisheries officer? Well, not in this area. Okay. And regarding subsistence fishing, when you contact the band council, in your case it's the Innu, to explain that there are people fishing illegally, what type of relationship do you have with the Innu band? We have very good collaboration with them. All of the leaders I know from Innu organizations in my region are very collaborative. They're against poaching, whether it's by Indigenous people or non-Indigenous people, they're against it. They don't support that in any way. So First Nations want us to take action, commercial fishers want us to act, but DFO tells fisheries officers, don't take action against poachers. Well, I can't tell you that's what they say now, but I see that when we report something regarding an Indigenous poacher, nothing is done. In my area, there's nothing that's done. And I can tell you something. It has a snowball effect. One person does it, makes some money under the table. It's not reported. It's very appealing. And then someone else says, I'll do it too, because that person's allowed to do it. Why wouldn't I? And then there's more and more who do it. In my area, I had the only commercial fishing license in my zone. They're small zones. And all of a sudden, I saw that there was the equivalent of another license, but illegal in terms of crates. Thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes. That is the end of our first round.
Second round, starting with Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for all the witnesses for your honesty and appearing. Mr. Vacher, in your training as a conservation officer or fisheries officer, was there an oath that you took to swear to protect the resource or anything like that?
Oui, tout à fait.
Yes, I swore an oath to the Queen at the time, to respect my commitment as a fisheries officer to protect the resource.
So you and your colleagues would be very dedicated towards protecting the resource first and foremost. Would that be a correct statement?
Oui, normalement.
Yes, usually when you want to become a fisheries officer, it's because you care about protecting the resource. That's the fundamental mission of the fisheries officer, to protect the resource and fish habitat.
Okay, thank you. Are you, or does the Fisheries Act and the resultant regulations from the Act cover off all of the potential conditions of license and season opening specifics for fisheries operating in Canada?
À ma connaissance,
To my knowledge, yes. To my knowledge, it covers just about all of the fisheries in Canada.
Are you aware of any other agreements that may be signed or agreed to by the Government of Canada that may allow other fisheries to operate outside of what is in the Fisheries Act or the conditions of license in the Act and regulations?
dans ma région,
In my region, no, I don't have knowledge of that. Not in my region.
Are you aware of, or have you heard of any of this in other regions of Eastern Canada?
oui, j'ai déjà entendu.
Yes, I've heard about it in the Baie des Chaleurs in Gaspésie, that there were agreements between DFO and Indigenous communities without other fishers or communities being consulted. I've heard people talk about that.
Okay, and would the fisheries officers in those areas have been trained or provided the details of those agreements?
Je pourrais pas vous.
I wouldn't be able to answer honestly, because it happened after I was a fisheries officer, and since then I've lost touch with my former colleagues.
Okay, thank you. Again, do you sense that organized crime may be involved in the in some of these illegal fisheries?
Oui,
Yes, certainly. Yes. There's no doubt about that. When there's money to be made, it attracts those who want to make money. And there are people who have fewer scruples than others, who have no issue with poaching, with making alliances with Indigenous people, who won't be bothered by authorities. So it's like an alliance between criminal organizations that don't respect the law and Indigenous fishers who have Indigenous status.
Okay, thank you. I'll change now, or switch over now to Mr. Ribert. Mr. Ribert, you talked about legal landings and dockside, I believe dockside monitoring is what you're referring to, or specific docks where offloading takes place so that the catch can be monitored and reported. Do all of the landings occur at those designated docks, or are there landings that occur at other docks where there is no monitoring?
C'est exactement ça.
That's exactly it. At the designated dock, there wouldn't be any illegal landings. Illegal landings are at non-designated docks. And they have ways of operating. So the boat that arrives at the dock, there's another boat that meets them and distributes crab to another boat. And the other boat goes to a non-designated dock. And that's how illegal landings are done. There are other ways of operating. They go near the coast and they put this in shrimp bags and they get them later. There are a number of ways to do illegal landings. I've heard as well that there could be collusion with crab processors. Some of my fishers told me that if you go to a certain location, 50% of the catch would be under the table. So with a major quota, if there's a lot, that person refused the offer, but 50% of the total landing is an illegal landing, and it takes an association with fish processors. Thank you very much.
Mr. Arnold, next we're going to go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. My first question is to Mr. Biot. Mr. Biot, how long have you been fishing in LFA 25, which is the fall lobster fishery shared between Prince Edward Island and New Brunswick?
15 years.
And just briefly, over that period, the catches were increasing for a period of time. Am I correct?
Correct.
In this past fall, as a fisher, what did you observe as landings in this lobster landings in this fishery during the season that just closed?
Catches were down, I think 11%, 11 point something percent overall for all of the LFA, and mostly in the north end of the fishing area, they were down.
And as a fisher and fellow fishers that you may have spoken to, what would have been observed in this particular zone over the summer prior to the season opening? Was there any lobster fishing going on?
Yeah, there was thousands of traps out there summer. I think there was traps out there in May until July, sometime in July.
And was DFO protection personnel advised by fishers of fishing that was occurring there and to check on it to see if it was following an authorized fishery?
Yes, multiple times.
And what was the response that you may have received?
No response.
No response? And this came from numerous fishers all over the particular area?
Yes, New Brunswick and PEI fishers.
And these traps that were fishing for lobster, to your knowledge, what fishery may have they been part of?
FSC, Food, Social, and Ceremonial Fishery.
And under a food and ceremonial fishery, there is those that are supposed to be negotiated between the First Nations community and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans with trap limits imposed. Do you know if this occurred?
I'm not sure.
So you don't have any idea if this fishery was taking place in any pre-approved arrangement between DFO and...
Yes, actually, it was approved by DFO.
But you are unaware if...
I'm aware of that it was.
Okay. But the number of traps that would be allowed in this fishery, were they following those regulations or stipulations?
Not that I'm aware of. Okay. I don't think.
Are you was this the first season where this particular fishery recorded a overall decline in the catch?
No, it has been going down for three years probably.
Okay.
Overall, 3 or 4.
And has there been a larger effort put in under fisheries outside of the regular commercial fishery in that area?
Yes.
Okay. Are you, a question, are you familiar, recently the government of Nova Scotia established a enforcement and protection division to enforce regulations as it relate to lobster when it hits the wharf. There is a bit of an issue between two levels of government when lobster lands on the wharf and then moves to buyers. This is controlled by provincial regulations. Do you think if the other provinces had similar enforcement agencies that would follow the path of lobster when it hits the wharf, to use that terminology, and makes its way to buyers and then from buyer to buyer to ensure that it follows a documented path, would that help avoid something that's occurring in your area?
I think so, yes.
Okay. And one, thank you for giving a very good testimony here today as a young fisher in this particular area and concerned about the future of it. One point which is unique to your fishery is you released the large female lobster. Do you think that's something the department should enforce across all the lobster fisheries in Atlantic Canada?
I think yes, I really think it helps. When we started doing that, catches started going up a few years later, and I think it would would help other areas for sure.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony and for agreeing to appear here today.
Mr. Morrissey, et prochainement, on va à Monsieur Deschênes pour 2 minutes.
Now, Mr. Deschênes, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Vacher, I want to talk about how things happen when you're on the water, when you see poachers. Have you intervened? How did they react? Yes, it's happened often that I've intervened. I talk to them to try to have a collaborative approach. I say, rather than start by reporting them, I'll start by talking to them, see what they're doing, and the attitude is very clear. They tell us, leave us alone. This is our area. We're doing what we need to do. And if ever you want to get tough, we'll cut your equipment. They're threats. So imagine a fisher like me. It costs $50,000 to $60,000. I don't want to have my equipment ruined. So, of course, it's easier to ignore them. But when you realize that it's affecting your own lobster sales, because they don't need to declare for tax purposes, they don't need to follow anything. They can sell the lobster for a lot less than I can. So it makes a big difference. And this isn't accounting for all of the negative impacts on managing the resources, because this data isn't taken into account by DFO. So maybe one day it'll have a very negative impact on the resource. So if we summarize, you go out to sea, you fish legally, you respect the conditions of your license, you see poachers, you contact the band council and they tell you they're not authorized, you try to talk to the poachers, you receive threats, and so you call the fisheries officers, you ask them to do something, they do nothing, absolutely nothing. So you continue to fish in a climate, well, you're an honest fisher. How do you experience that? Is there fear for your safety when you're at sea? No, I'm not scared for my safety. But then I just don't go there to not have conflicts with the fishers. So it's as if my fishing zone gets smaller and smaller because I let them have that space and I try to not bother them because I don't want to have negative consequences. So the poachers are winning on all fronts right now. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Deschênes.
Go to Mr. Gunn for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Questions for Mr. Bouet. Before being elected as a member of Parliament and serving on this committee, I used to be a documentary filmmaker, and I was actually interviewing an individual one day about the drug crisis in Canada. And there was a line, we had stopped recording, but he had a line that stuck with me. We were talking about open-air drug use, and he said, "You get what you tolerate as a society." And I thought it was a really interesting line that stuck with me. And I wanted to ask you if you believe DFO is tolerating illegal fishing by certain groups or individuals in our society today.
Yes.
And do you believe that is a result of a conscious decision being made at DFO to not enforce the law in certain situations or of certain offenders based on their ethnicity? And if so, could you describe those situations that you've witnessed and why you believe DFO is fully aware of what is happening?
Well, I haven't witnessed it myself. I'm from PEI, but from what I'm told, it's happening a lot in New Brunswick. That certain ethnicities are not getting fined and charged for breaking the law.
This creates an increased amount of resentment among Indigenous and non-Indigenous fishermen and communities.
Can you repeat that? You kind of cut out.
Do you believe this has created an increase in the amount of resentment between Indigenous and non-Indigenous fishermen and communities?
Oh, yes, for sure.
Do you think that the lack of monitoring or the two-tier kind of enforcement of the Fisheries Act limits our ability to conserve this important resource and maintain the sustainability of the fishery?
Yes, I agree.
Can you describe in what way it does that?
Well, there's the FSC fishery is supposed to be monitored, or is supposed to be a quota, and supposedly quota. I don't know what that quota is. Nobody knows what that quota is, but it's not regulated. Nobody knows how much lobsters is being caught in LFA 25 and other areas. But I don't know if it was monitored, they would be stopped fishing at a certain time. You know what I mean? When this quota is caught, that they supposedly have.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hebert, you were talking about the snow crab, the illegal landings that you were concerned about. Can you expand on what you're most concerned about the illegal landings, and if you believe if this continues to go unenforced or unmonitored, it could undermine the ability to conserve this important resource and maintain its sustainability going forward?
C'est sûr, puis ça dépend.
Of course, and it depends on the scope of the illegal landings. But at a certain point, it'll be a big impact. Between in 1989, there was a collapse of 6,950 tons. Before 1990, it was a competitive fishery. And with a competitive fishery, it led to an overexploitation of the stock. And so landings reached the lowest level ever known in the history of that fishery. And at that time, we didn't know the impact. But since 1990, fishers agreed to pay to have observers at sea. At the time, we had 30% coverage. So they decided to have weighing at the dock for all landings. Fishers put in a lot of effort. They paid for estimates of commercial biomass to see the dynamic of the population. And so what we saw in the 90s, even though landings were low, the population did go back up. And so with lower exploitation, we were able to have the cyclical biomass for snow crab and current quotas. But if there's illegal landings, the difficulty in determining whether there's a major impact on the population, well, we need to keep reproduction in mind in mature females. Currently, for mature females, there's a decrease in the average size of mature females, so a decrease in fertility, total fertility of the population. And we didn't yet know the impacts on the stock's genetics. That can take years to have impacts on that. But all factors that decrease the reproductive capacity of the stock have impacts on 10, 12 years for reproduction, because a tiny crab takes 9 to 10 years to get to commercial size. So when there's a lot of illegal fishing of the biggest crab, well, there's an impact on the reproductive capacity, because there's an opportunity for the smaller males to reproduce, and that affects the genetics of the stock. And even though we have the precautionary principle and we have biological reference points so that the population is always in a healthy zone, if we continue to have illegal landings, instead of being in the healthy zone, we might end up in the prudential zone and then the critical zone, and we don't want to end up there with our stock. Thank you very much.
Mr. Gunn, prochainement, on va à Monsieur Cormier pour 5 minutes.
Monsieur Vacher,
Mr. Vacher, back to you quickly. You talked about illegal fishing with certain indigenous communities. I have an article from my region. The leader of Papineau's First Nation is totally opposed to this, and their season, they do it during the same season as commercial fishers in our region. We've always had good collaboration with them. So let's set the record straight. Regarding illegal fishing with Indigenous people, at the commercial level, commercial fishers of lobster, it's no secret, there's no weighing at the dockside for lobster. Have you also seen, we can't necessarily say illegal landings, but undeclared landings? Have you seen that in your career? The question is for me, Mr. Yes. Listen, it's very clear. There are two ways of managing the resource. We can't compare the crab fishery and the lobster fishery. Regardless of the quantity, it's not significant in the lobster industry because it's about the number of permits and the length of the fishing season. That's how it's managed. And it was the best managed in Canada because in the Magdalen Islands, there's data since 1875. Are you talking about crab or lobster? Lobster. It's not because there are landings that aren't accounted for that it's significant. It's not significant. How do you want us to have good data on a healthy or not healthy resource if we don't have data for every year to have an idea of how the stock of lobster is doing if we don't have landings? The accounting is done differently. Most fishers, 90% of fishers, sell to factories and they have to produce a receipt. They're obligated to produce that. Mr. Vacher, you're talking to the son of a fisherman. My father had bad years for lobster fishing, but everybody knows that there are some catches that are not declared. And I think that's a factor where we don't have good data regarding the resource for lobster fishing. That's my opinion. Maybe yours is different. But for Indigenous and commercial fishing, we need to ensure we have a well-managed fishery so we have scientific data. Because for Indigenous and commercial fishing, this is about resource management, so it's sustainable. But how can it be sustainable for the future, for future generations, if we don't have data? I understand your point of view, but I'm going to ask other questions now. Mr. Noel, you're the owner of a crab license. The new Fisheries Act from 2017 regarding owner-operators, so that the owner has to be on the ship. It was something the associations had asked for a long time, fishers as well, who wanted to ensure there was no questionable agreements or financing with factories to take over a business that you and others worked very hard to set up, those of you who have licenses. It still creates problems where licenses are worth a lot of money, whether for crab or lobster. We're talking about millions of dollars. Are there mechanisms that should be put in the law or financially so we can keep the licenses in our regions? Because licenses leave our regions through questionable rules. And given the price of those licenses, would you agree to propose solutions to the government so that those licenses can be acquired by a group, families, nieces and nephews? Would you agree to prepare a proposal to keep those licenses in our communities so they're not purchased by corporations with questionable agreements? Absolutely. As I was saying, it's been a little while that our companies, a lot of our businesses go to other provinces, they go elsewhere. Our coastal communities depend on them. So if we let this happen, there's no doubt that some areas will be really affected. We think about family businesses that should be established with some strict, structured rules so you can't have control. So it needs to be structured so that families are directly in the corporation. For a young person who wants to have a down payment, a license that's worth $15 or $20 million, it's hard to get a $5 million down payment. Absolutely. We don't have to get up to $15 million. I have a lot of fishers. I have friends. Their licenses were transferred from father to son with a lower cost. And where we are today, at the end of the year, there's no profit, there's nothing. And it's a minimal cost. So if you want to sell a license quickly or to someone else, it's impossible. There's no financing that can be done. Thank you very much, Mr. Cormier.
Our second round, we're going to have a short third round of questioning. We'll have 3 minutes for the Conservatives, Liberals, and then 2 minutes pour le bloc.
2 minutes for the bloc.
Mr. Small, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To Mr. Biot, and I apologize for not pronouncing your name correctly earlier. Your Member of Parliament, Mr. Morrissey, has had some trouble believing that controlling agreements exist. Who are the big players out in the Tignish area in terms of processors? You name some of them?
Royal Star is one of them.
Do you
Fisheries
know
Co-op.
of any fish harvesters that would have borrowed money from some of the processors out in that part of Prince Edward Island?
No.
No,
Not that I know of.
It doesn't happen in the lobster fishery in that part of.
Not that I know of.
No, okay. Just wondering if you've heard talk of any controlling agreements any of your buddies might have been involved in out there.
Years ago, yes, but not there. There hasn't been any controlling agreements around here that I am aware of over the last 7-8 years,
have
maybe
you heard
more.
talk of any controlling agreements anywhere throughout the PEI LFAs?
No, not anymore. Like I really don't know of any anymore in this area.
That's amazing. Thank you. Monsieur Hebert, if we've heard some alarming testimony around this committee over the last few weeks regarding lack of enforcement based on ethnicity. If that continues, if that's not checked rapidly, in the coming months or years, what's going to be the effect on the public resource, the fishery in Atlantic Canada and Quebec?
In the snow crab fishery in the southern part of the Gulf of the St. Lawrence, because all landings are weighed dockside, I don't think for Indigenous people, they go to Lamek, Chipegan, the main docks, so all landings are weighed. I don't think there's a major problem for illegal landings from Indigenous fishers. So the capacity to weigh all of the landings at the dock really has an impact on illegal landings that are done, like in the lobster fishery now. So if there's the introduction of dockside weighing for coastal fishers, for lobster, there would be a significant decrease in illegal activity in that fishery. For snow crab, because landings are done at specific docks, it's very well organized to weigh all of the landings at the dock for snow crab. So illegal landings are minimal compared to lobster.
Very much, Mr. Small. Next, we're going to go to prochainement à Monsieur Cormier.
Now, Mr. Cormier, 3 minutes. Mr. Vacher, I'll go back to you because maybe we misunderstood each other. Maybe you didn't understand correctly. I want us to be clear. What I was saying earlier is that in lobster fishery, we'll set aside food, social, ceremonial fishing I'm talking about commercial lobster fishing. There's no dockside weighing, no. So we have no data. That's false. There is data. There is very clear data. We have to declare under the Act, every commercial fisher has to declare catch, and we are verified. We are verified. So that's not the issue. If you target that as the issue, you're going to turn that fishery into crab fishing with quotas. That's not the solution. It's absolutely not the solution. The solution is to work on those who are not declaring, those who are illegal. Because when you're legal, when you're respecting the law, you declare. What's undeclared is what's illegal. That's what I'm getting to. Undeclared catch is not illegal if it's declared at the end of the year on your income over the course of the year. But without dockside landing, without it being weighed, there was a report by Radio Canada that identified that in Indigenous fishing and in commercial fishing, there's illegal landing or undeclared catch. So how can we have strong data to indicate how lobster is doing if we don't have the real data available to us? It's the same thing for crab fishing. I worked on the commercial crab fishery, those who were doing illegal landing. It's illegal to do it illegally if you want to. So in addition, we shouldn't mix things up. A lobster fisher and a crab fisher has to declare the catch. The lobster or the crab fisher needs to have an observer for the accounting because there's a quota. Okay. But lobster fishing is by participant. The connection is cutting out here. I understand. Last question, because I just have a few seconds left. Do you think the fines are high enough for the Fisheries Act, or should they be increased to deter people from illegal landings or undeclared catch? I think it could be increased, but I think fisheries officers need to work on these issues. I think that's the issue. We have a resource. You said earlier that you wanted to work on this, but you were told not to intervene. So what do? Well, that's the issue. We need to tell the authorities, fisheries authorities, officers need to enforce the law for everyone. They need to work on the most important rules that have an impact on the resource, on proper management of the resource, not on the rules like the person didn't put their number or wrote something incorrectly on the fishing boat. That doesn't change anything for the resource. There are rules. There needs to be judgment in law enforcement, and that's what's lacking. Thank you very much, Mr. Cormier. Now we will conclude with Mr. Deschênes. 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have questions for Mr. Abad and Mr. Noel. Thank you for joining us. From your testimony, it says if we look at the mortality rate, it's higher than what it should be, and that could be because of illegal fishing. What is the collaboration you have with DFO to fight against illegal fishing? At the last advisory meeting, we shared that concern about illegal landings in the southern Gulf of the St. Lawrence, and there's a difference between natural mortality for a healthy population and an exploited resource in the Gulf of the St. Lawrence. So there's a big difference with natural mortality. What we proposed was a number of measures, a number of elements to limit illegal landings. How did DFO respond? There was good collaboration with DFO, and we're trying to find ways, because for the crab fishery, because there are a number of elements, and it was well organized with DFO for management of the resource and sharing the resource. What we want to do is find ways that are appropriate to limit illegal landings so everyone can fish. I hear that they're listening to you, but is there action? Do you see DFO taking action against illegal landings for crab? At the beginning of the 2025 season, fisheries officers came to see us at our association to discuss a number of factors, doubts about illegal landings. Those fisheries officers conducted verifications, and there are some fishers who were found breaking the rules. But overall, what we want is to further limit the opportunity to have illegal landings. So 100% observers on all boats. That would totally eliminate the problem. We could have cameras on the boats, and then you just eliminate the problem. There are things that could be done with DFO to limit illegal landings, and that could have a negative impact on the stock. Thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes.
We'll complete our questions for this panel. I do want to thank our witnesses for taking the time to meet with us both in person and by video conference. And certainly your testimony is going to be very helpful as we're formulating our recommendations for the report that's going to be forthcoming. But with that, we're going to briefly suspend for a few minutes so that the committee can pursue its meeting in camera to discuss the preliminary drafting instructions for our current study.
Thank you.